Though Count Orlok is directly based off of Count Dracula, the titular character from F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu has always been a distinct persona. And even if that is to bypass copyright laws, it's also formed this odd cross between man and monster. In essence, Count Orlok has a combination of more animalistic vampires from folklore and the civilized aspects of Dracula, culminating in a being that is a separate form of life altogether. This unique vampire has gotten various adaptations over the years, namely films from 1979 by Werner Herzog and 2024 by Robert Eggers. And both of these versions take Count Orlok's mysterious persona and shape him into a more intricate character. But even after pulling from the same source material, these movies deliver two very separate depictions of the same creature. Whereas Herzog showcases an isolated and disillusioned vampire, Eggers' Orlok is a blood-seeking monster that takes what he wants. So let's take a look at these two iterations and find out what makes Count Orlok, Count Orlok. Thomas Hutter is sent off to sell the ancient Count Orlok a house in Visburg, unknowingly by Orlok's henchman, Herr Canuck. While there, Orlok sees a picture of Thomas's wife, Ellen, and grows an attachment to her. He buys the estate, and after sucking Thomas's blood, he travels to Visburg by ship with the sickly Thomas tailing behind him. When Thomas arrives, he grows sick and can't remember Ellen, and after a plague brought by Orlok begins wiping out the town, Ellen discovers she must sacrifice herself in order to distract Orlok until the sun rises, killing herself in the process but freeing the town of Count Orlok's plague. But, in this version exclusively, Thomas transforms into a vampire, riding off into the sunset to continue Nosferatu's reign. Adapting a silent film is a relatively simple task, but capturing the feel of a silent film is another feat. There's a distinct feeling witnessing silent scenes play out with nothing but an orchestra in the background. So how do you translate that to modern films? This is where I believe Werner Herzog captured the original Nosferatu incredibly, as the 1979 film is a beauty to watch, ignoring all the controversy behind it. For lack of better phrasing, this remake captures the original's mood by simply being quiet. Many scenes have no music, and the film takes time to let the audience just sit and listen. This overall emotion is enhanced by Count Orlok himself, as Klaus Kinski delivers a strangely melancholic portrayal of the character. This version of Count Orlok acts like a man sick with vampirism rather than a bloodthirsty vampire. In his interactions with Thomas, it's apparent that Orlok is a recluse who longs for a human life. Rather than luring in Thomas with malicious intent, Orlok appears to yearn for company, not coming across as dangerous until Thomas accidentally cuts his thumb. And even when Orlok is drawn to the fresh blood, he says he must take care of the wound, like he's trying to excuse his blood sucking, like he doesn't want to seem weird to Thomas.
It could give you blood poisoning. Please, let me do it. It's the oldest remedy in the world.
And when Thomas rejects him, Orlok tries to fight back against his urges before he can no longer take it. He could have easily just lunged at Thomas to suck up all the blood, but he didn't want to scare Thomas off. Orlok would rather stay hungry than lose Thomas's companionship. For the most part, Orlok keeps trying to act like a regular person around Thomas, and in further interactions, he can't help opening up to Thomas, as it's probably the first welcome visitor he's had in decades.
Time is an abyss, profound as 1,000 nights. Centuries come and go. There are things more horrible than death. Can you imagine enduring centuries, experiencing each day the same futile things?
In these interactions, while Orlok never says that he's a vampire, he comes as close as he can without even being prompted, as he finally has someone to talk to. We learn here that he's not out for blood, he's not enjoying the death that he brings. Orlok is flat out depressed about his existence. Rather than thriving off of each century, the centuries are draining him of his life, and now he's little more than a body without a soul. This even shows in his castle, as unlike other gothic vampire castles, the interior of this film's castle just feels drained. The rooms are all empty and a bland white color, and the whole building just feels absolutely lifeless. In my opinion, out of all the films, Thomas feels the most out of place in this castle. It feels like no one should even be seeing the inside, and imagining having to live there. You can see why Orlok wants to move, because he's not only being shut in from the world, but he also has to live in a space devoid of life for centuries. Eventually, we're able to see Orlok contrast with humanity when the ship silently rolls into Visburg. His motives for moving differ with each adaptation, but in all of his films, he acts as a plague carrier, whether he means to or not. I think Herzog sums up Orlok perfectly in this film, as he described Orlok as not a monster, but an ambivalent, masterful force of change. Again, Count Orlok is not happily wiping out the town with an evil scheme. Rather, he just acts as an embodiment of death. He was the individual chosen to spread plague, but as an individual, he couldn't care less whether or not the plague works. He actually wants to be close to people, but being a carrier of death, he's doomed to be alone. During Orlok's time in Visburg, I start to feel less aversion and more sympathy towards him. We see him literally looking through the windows like a stray dog, and one of my favorite scenes is where we see him running through the dark town. His cape flows behind him like a ghost, and I would, legitimately compare the scene to a horse running in an open pasture. He seems like he's finally free of his depressing castle, and it's kind of beautiful to watch him become reinvigorated with life again. These scenes really humanize Orlok, especially in his interaction with Ellen, as it's strangely mutual. There's really contrast with 2024's Nosferatu, but Orlok doesn't just demand Ellen's love here, and he actually apologizes for letting himself in. But Ellen stands her ground, and during this conversation, she actually seems to be the one in control, eventually shooing him off. This also shows how timid Orlok is compared to his other interpretations, as he talks pretty normally and doesn't just use his powers to get what he wants. Yes, he seems jealous of Thomas and Ellen, but it's not seething with vengeance. He's just desperate for a relationship, and Ellen is so far the closest he can get to companionship. And in this film, that's really all he's after. Count Orlok constantly mentions how living without love and without life is worse than death, and he spends the whole movie pursuing just one relationship. Despite being a centuries-old count with the power to wipe out an entire city, this adaptation of Count Orlok is a depressed creature who just wants to feel alive again. And at the end of the day, he doesn't go out in a flashy plume of smoke or a monstrous roar. He crumbles up and dies in a corner like a bug. Even with his regal status, there's nothing extravagant about him. He doesn't even get a spectacular death. The other characters actually still think he's just a regular guy after he dies. He doesn't even get the novelty of being called a vampire. Herzog's version of Orlok is little more than a man, and this movie really shows the deep emotional effects of existing for centuries. It succeeds in being more of a gloomy, psychological take on vampirism rather than a scary horror show. And this Orlok is a beautifully sad character. But, while this vampire is a pitiful being the audience can feel remorse for, Robert Eggers' Count Orlok is a force to be reckoned with. Thomas Hutter is once again sent off to sell Count Orlok in a state in Visburg. However, Ellen's premonitions are much stronger in this version. While Thomas continually escapes death, his relatives, Friedrich and Anna, try to care for Ellen's constant night terrors, seizures, and ailments. Eventually, they bring in Alban von Franz, an expert in alchemy and the occult, who understands Ellen's supernatural connection to Nosferatu. After both Orlok and Thomas arrive in Visburg, plague hits and Orlok begins killing Ellen's companions to force her to profess her love. As we discover that, while Orlok cannot love, Ellen's past prayers have intertwined their destinies. So, as von Franz distracts Thomas with a fake witch hunt, Ellen gives herself unto Orlok, distracting him until daybreak and freeing the world of Orlok's plague. Robert Eggers has mentioned many times how this iteration of Nosferatu has developed in his mind since his childhood, and this is clearly one of Nosferatu's most developed adaptations. The relationships between all of the characters are deeply fleshed out, and Ellen is now given backstory with Count Orlok to heighten the stakes and narrative. And as we see throughout the entire movie, this Orlok is not some melancholic being that longs for love. This is a monster who has to satiate his appetite. Unlike Herzog's quieter adaptation, our characters are not given any peace and quiet once Orlok enters their lives. Thomas's approach to the castle is a grueling journey with superstitions and nightmares, and once he arrives in what feels like a fever dream, he receives no welcoming presence. His dinner and entire stay at the castle has him sweating and anxious, and whereas Herzog's Orlok made small talk and connected to Thomas, Eggers' Orlok establishes his dominance, commanding Thomas around the entire time.
Your lord, I will be addressed as the honor of my blood demands it.
What manner of ritual?
Speak not of it again!
This iteration of Orlok fully exercises his status as a wealthy ancient count, as Thomas is basically ignored and treated like a servant at the castle. Orlok has his face down in papers in every interaction, and he only looks directly at Thomas when commanding or about to attack. There is zero companionship here. Thomas is merely someone Orlok needs to get to Ellen. In addition to this sort of royal dominance over Thomas, Orlok is also a full-on beast in this version. His breath makes him sound like a rotting zombie, and he hones in on Thomas like a predator when Thomas draws blood. Unlike Herzog's Orlok, this count is in full control of his actions and takes pride in his kills. He won't hesitate to rip someone's throat out because they're in the same room. His bloodsucking is also more animalistic than what we've seen before, as instead of a haunting little kiss on the neck, he uses his entire body to suck gallons of blood straight out of people. The whole process is far more violent than any other Orlok we've seen. He even has his own wolves, and the rats that carry his plague are arguably more vicious than other films. After he gets his mortgage sorted out, Orlok discards Thomas and immediately makes his way to Visburg, crashing onshore and getting right down to business. He doesn't take time to enjoy the city or frolic in the dark. Rather, he moves into his evil lair and begins plotting how to get Ellen. And yes, even though he's a monster incapable of love, his connection to Ellen is so strong that he needs to satiate it. In this film, Ellen is born with a particular connection to the supernatural. In her youth, she prayed for a guardian angel to ease her loneliness, but her call awakened Count Orlok, who now has an unquenchable desire for Ellen. Now, Orlok looks to gain Ellen's devotion so he can finally rid himself of his hunger. Unlike other iterations, Ellen is the definitive main character in this film. You see how Orlok has had control over her since her youth, giving her night terrors that put her mind in his control, talking to her in her dreams, and after he arrives in Visburg, he can appear in a room in an instant. This isn't a simple conflict where Ellen can just stand her ground and spook him off with a cross. He literally stalks her in her dreams. Count Orlok's purpose is to get Ellen, and he will tear through anyone who comes close to her. This is far from a lonely, lovesick vampire. This is a force of nature that can control winds to hasten his travel. This is a monstrosity who has religions and entire texts based off of him. Ellen isn't just fighting off some vampire, she's fighting off a demon, and this demon thirsts for her and her alone. Speaking on that religion detail, Count Orlok is much more than a secluded superstition this time around. Rather, he's an established demonic being in the world. This is expanded on due to the film's introduction of Alban von Franz, the Van Helsing of the story. He's the only one who truly understands the severe supernatural threat of Ellen's situation, and he's the only hope in finding its solution. He knows everything about Nosferatu, about what remedies can help Ellen, about Nosferatu's warning signs and steps to dispelling it, but he doesn't just have some random gift of knowledge. He has literally studied this being. Count Orlok isn't a random vampire that people write folklore about. He's in churches, he's in books, he has his own sigil for crying out loud. His coffin is more than a rickety old hunk of wood, it's solid stone made for him specifically. This isn't just a vampire, this is the vampire. Count Orlok this time around is a hellish royalty, and taking him down feels like dethroning a god. And that's why Ellen's sacrifice of her life and love hits so hard in this version compared to other entries, as she is literally the only person in the world who can defeat this evil. And she can't just give up her neck, she has to swear away her entire person. Even after Ellen fights this devil for all these years, Orlok cannot be defeated and humanity cannot be saved without a complete sacrifice. When the time finally comes, Orlok lets out a scream as his body erupts. And Ellen can't just seduce Orlok and that kills him fully. This is an entire ritual. Even after Orlok has been drained of life, von Franz must seal the sacrifice with flowers and a verse in order to fully put the plague to rest.
And lo, the maiden fair did offer up her love unto the beast, and with him lay in close embrace until the first cock crow. Her willing sacrifice thus broke the curse and freed them from the plague of Nosferatu.
And Orlok doesn't simply disappear or crumple up, he shrivels up into a husk of a corpse. This is more than a vampire dying, this is centuries of blood and rot and age getting ripped out of Orlok's body. This death sequence is so grotesque that it actually dehumanizes him, ironically. He has no more gold, no more ancient language, not even the extravagant clothes he wears. Now you're just watching this creature's rotten flesh shrivel while his eyes bleed black blood. We now clearly see him contrast with another human, and he's fully revealed to be a monster. Unlike the meeker versions we've seen of Orlok, this Count Orlok is a hulking, rotten demon sickened by all forms of life. He shows no emotions other than hatred or a silent dominance, and even though he maintains his identity as a regal, wealthy count, he never shows pleasure in exploiting his powers. But are these traits present in the other Orloks? Well, that's what the whole video is about. Let's take a step back and compare these iterations. In both adaptations, Count Orlok's main character traits still remain. He's an ancient vampire unbothered by life, and nothing on Earth has much power over him except for his attachment to Ellen. And while the quiet, pathetic 1979 Orlok contrasts heavily with 2024's massive, unmerciful monster, they both are still two sides of the same character. They both stick to the dark, but one does it out of shame while the other does it to hunt. They both bring death, but one does it inadvertently while the other seeks it out. The great thing about a film from 100 years ago is that it leaves a lot up for interpretation, as the 1922 vampire has both human and inhuman characteristics. You see him walking around town with his coffin like a construction worker, and then a couple minutes later he's staring and moving around like a marionette. So you can pull a lot of different interpretations from this depending on what you want your film to be. Even with just mannerisms specifically, Herzog's adaptation captures more of the ghostly movement of Orlok perfectly in an artistic sense, and Eggers translated it more into a grounded behavior, with Thomas freaking out as Orlok stares him down and hones in on him. In essence, these two directors both pick different sides of Orlok to build their version off of. Werner Herzog's film pulls from the silent eeriness of the original, while Robert Eggers focuses on the bloody, organic force of the Count. So at the end of the day, who is Count Orlok? Well, it really depends. Do you see this vampire as a sad husk of a person who hasn't felt drawn to another life in centuries? Do you see him as a threatening creature that can wipe out an entire population with ease? Or do you see him as a funny vampire running around and doing donuts in a super carriage? I'd say at the end of the day, Count Orlok is more of a title than a set-in-stone character. Even if you only take his character based off of the 1922 film, there's so many details that are left out. Like Robert Eggers has said, Murnau's film is like a fairy tale. He mentioned how Dracula, the novel, is somewhat overstuffed with Victoriana, and Murnau's Nosferatu is a simpler story. Because of this, Orlok's deeper emotions and motives can easily be warped to fit the narrative a director wants, as each iteration of the character has defining characteristics and themes that the film homes in on. The story of Nosferatu is so interesting because each movie is a reimagining of its source material rather than a simple remake. If you want a melancholic and bleak vampire film, Herzog crafted a masterpiece there. If you want a bloody, thrilling monster flick, Eggers is the way to go. And if you're into a more fairy tale of a film with more basic characters, give Murnau's version a watch. But if you just want a great gothic movie, watch any version of Nosferatu. This vampire, his clothes, his castle, rats, environment, characters, and everything surrounding him makes a shadowy beauty of a watch. He showcases a quieter, bleaker side of vampires that isn't shown as much as your typical vampire film. And there's just something special that's been born out of someone making an unauthorized version of Dracula. And Count Orlok, you've always been my favorite vampire. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know if there are any comparisons you may have noticed between movies or any different interpretations of the films you guys thought of. Also, I haven't finished reading Dracula, so if any of these comparisons transfer over to Dracula, also let me know in the comments. Alright, now let me gush about stuff other than Orlok. My favorite part of Eggers' film is how they did Herr Canuck. He is absolutely perfect. I love how rabid he is, and his laughing amps up so well from his first interaction with Thomas. My absolute favorite part, though, is this run he has. That's Canuck right there. That's the crazy little man I know. In the original film, there's this kind of comedic scene where the whole city chases after an escaped Canuck, and that little run is just captured so well with this one shot he has. Thank you, Eggers, for seeing the Canuck fanbase. And in Herzog's film, this is probably the most talked about part, but Thomas's journey to the castle is literally a jaw-dropping moment. When I first saw this film, I wasn't paying too much attention at first, but then the film just went quiet, and then this orchestra starts fading in over these clouds and mountains and just... it's beautiful. If you haven't seen this film, at least just go look up this scene on YouTube. It feels a lot longer when you're watching the movie, but there's just something about it that I can't explain. It's like being in a painting. Like the painting is singing to you, and it's just a beautiful moment. Might have to make another Nosferatu video, I'm not gonna lie.